Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Jaya Radha Gopinath, Radha Gopinath, Shri Radhe. Jaya Gauranitai, Jaya Gauranitai, Jaya Gauranitai, Jaya Gauranitai. Jaya Jagannatha, Jaya Jagannatha, Jaya Baladeva, Jaya Subhadra. Jaya Jaya Prabhupada, 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 Jaya Jaya Prabhupada. Jaya Jaya Gurudev, 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 Jaya Jaya Gurudev. Nita Gop Premanandi. Jai Om Vishnupad Paramahamsa Parivajikacharya Ashtotra Shri Srimad His Divine Grace Shila Abhay Charanarvinda Bhakti Vedanta Swami Shila Prabhupada Ki Jai Om Vishnupad Paramahamsa Parivajagacharya Stotra Shri Srimad His Divine Grace Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Goswami Maharaj Srila Prabhupada Ki Antachaya Shri Nai Nam Thakur Ki प्रेम से कहो श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर शिवसादि गौर भक्त वृंद के श्री राधा कृष्ण गोप गोपीनाथ श्याम कुंड राधा कुंड गिरि गोवर्धन के श्री वृंदावन धाम की श्री मथुरा धाम की श्री मायापुर धाम की श्री जगन्नाथपुरी धाम की गंगा माई की यमुना माई की तुलसी देवी की Shri Radha Gopinath ki, Srila Prabhupada Transcendental Book Distribution ki, Srila Prabhupada Transcendental Prasadam Distribution ki, Hitai Gaur Premanandi, all glory to the assembled devotees, Hare Krishna. All glory to the assembled devotees, Hare Krishna. All glory to the assembled devotees, Hare Krishna. All glory to Shri Guru and Shri Guru. Hare Krishna. Today we are reading chapter 15 of the third canto, description of the kingdom of God, text number 1. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Maitreya Uvacha. Prajapatyam tu tatteja. Paratejo hanam ditihi. Dadara varshani satam. Sankamana suradhanat. Maitreya uvacha. Prajapatyam tu tatteja. Paratejo hanam ditihi. Dadara varshani satam. Sankamana suradhanat. Maitreya uvacha. Prajapatyam tu tatteja. Paratejo hanam ditihi. Tadara varshani satatam. Sankamana suradhanat. Word for word. Maitreya Uvacha. The sage Maitreya said, Prajapatyam of the great Prajapati. But Tat Tejaha, his powerful semen, Parateja, others' prowess, Hanam, troubling, Ditihi, Diti, Kashyapa's wife, Dadara, bore, Varshani, years, Satam, 100, Sankamana, being doubtful, Surardhanat, disturbing to the demigods. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace, Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada ki. Translation. Sri Maitreya said, My dear Vidura, Diti, the wife of the sage Kashyapa, could understand that the sons within her womb would be a cause of disturbance to the demigods. As such, she continuously bore the powerful semen of Kashyapa Muni, which was meant to give trouble to others, for 100 years. The great sage Sri Maitreya was explaining to Vidura the activities of the demigods, including Lord Brahma. When Diti heard from her husband that the sons she bore within her abdomen would be causes of disturbances to the demigods, she was not very happy. There are two classes of men, devotees and non-devotees. Non-devotees are called demons and devotees are called demigods. No sane man or woman can tolerate the non-devotees giving trouble to devotees. Diti, therefore, was reluctant to give birth to her babies. She waited for 100 years so that at least she could save the demigods from the disturbance for that period. Om Ajnanatimirandhasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manovishtam Sapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Tadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Parakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavam Cha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathanvitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Tavadutam Parijanathaitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagananita Shri Vishakanvitam Cha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Shute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vancha Kalpa Tirubhascha Kripa Sindhu Bhaivacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrindam Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna. Read the verse again. Sri Maitreya said, My dear Vidura, Diti, the wife of the sage Kashyapa, could understand that the sons within her womb would be a cause of disturbance to the demigods. As such, she continuously bore the powerful semen of Kashyapa Muni, which was meant to give trouble to others for 100 years. So obviously this was happening in Satya Yuga, so people, and especially Diti, such a powerful personality that she can hold, she can bore the children within her womb for 100 years. So obviously we hear in Satya Yuga people live for much longer. They perform austerities and penances for at least 10,000 years, which to us today would be an alien concept. Just, I think 3 days ago I came across somewhere on YouTube that there is the oldest living personality on this planet who is 125 years old. And he happens to be from India, and he is actually a yogi. I forget his name. I remembered it up until yesterday, and he's attributing it because of his practice of yoga and his discipline. And so I don't know much about that person, but 125 years seems to be a long time for us people in Kali Yuga, as opposed to in Satya Yuga, people live for 100,000 years. So everything is relative. Even those that are living 100,000 years in Satya Yuga, for them, it would be equivalent for us living a longer duration, such as over 100 years. So coming back to this verse, and there are quite a few poignant points that Srila Prabhupada mentions here. And one that struck to me was, in this purport, Srila Prabhupada says, there are two classes of men, devotees and non-devotees. Non-devotees are called demons, and devotees are called demigods. So there are just two classes of people, devotees and non-devotees, or demons or demigods, and there's nothing in between. There's no room for anything else. So, demigods, because they abide by the instructions of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So they are obedient to Vishnu and his instructions, whereas the demons, as we understand, are always in defiance. So as I was reading this, obviously I was drawn to this chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, chapter 16, the divine and demoniac natures. And the very beginning, it'll be good for us to just listen to what are the divine qualities and the demoniac qualities. So, chapter 16, the very first verse, Krishna says, the Supreme Personality of Godhead said, fearlessness, purification of one's existence, cultivation of spiritual knowledge, charity, self-control, performance of sacrifice, study of the Vedas, austerity, simplicity, non-violence, truthfulness, freedom from anger, renunciation, tranquility, aversion to fault-finding, compassion for all living entities, freedom from covetousness, gentleness, modesty, steady determination, vigor, forgiveness, fortitude, cleanliness, and freedom from envy and from the passion for honor. These transcendental qualities, the son of Bharata, belong to godly men endowed with divine nature. And I'll just read on the other side, what does he attribute to be the demoniac quality? So the Sanskrit is text number 4. Dambo darpo bhimanascha krodha parusham evacha agyanam chabijadasya partha sampadam asurim. Pride, arrogance, conceit, anger, harshness and ignorance, these qualities belong to those of demoniac nature, O son of Pritha. And a very famous verse in the Gita, text 7, Pravritim cha nivritim cha janata vedur ashuraha na saucham na pisacharo na satyam teshu vidyate. Those who are demoniac do not know what is to be done and what is not to be done. Neither cleanliness nor proper behavior nor truth is found in them. So this chapter details out the demoniac qualities and the divine qualities. And as we understand, especially for us in Kali Yuga, these are qualities that Krishna is referring to. And in the Bhagavad Gita, knowledge is not solely based on just skill, it's based on virtues. So there are certain virtues that we should all try to inculcate in our daily lives, in our practice, and especially when we are representing Srila Prabhupada and our Guru Parampara. Even as devotees, sometimes it comes upon us what sort of sadachar do we actually ascribe to. As Srila Prabhupada always said that Vaikuntha mentality is where there's in Vaikuntha, Kunta means anxiety, in Vaikuntha there's no anxiety. But in the material world we always face anxiety because of our conditioning and because of our desire to lord it over material nature. So in Vaikuntha everyone is working for the pleasure of Vishnu. Interestingly, once I was reading my Guru Maharaj's book, and in that he said he had an exchange with Srila Govinda Maharaj, and in his exchange he was describing verses in Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita Madhya Leela 22nd chapter, verse 128 to 129, about the 5 most potent forms of devotional service. And I'll read it out what it was written here. So the 5 most potent forms of devotional service that can bring us to the state of pure devotional service: Sadhu Sangha Nama Kirtana, Bhagavata Shravana, Mathura Vasa Sri Murtira, Shraddhaya Sevana. One should associate with devotees, chant the holy name of the Lord, hear Srimad Bhagavatam, reside at Mathura, and worship the deity with faith and veneration. He continued on, Sakala sadhana shreshta pancha anga, Krishna prema janmaya panchera alpa sangha. These 5 limbs of devotional service are the best of all. Even a slight performance of these 5 awakens love for Krishna. And then my Guru Maharaj Giriraj Swami is telling Srila Govinda Maharaj, I told him how much I cherished Mathura Vas, residing in Mathura. And Govinda Maharaj responds, his eyes opened up. Kamsa also resided in Mathura. So he was telling him, and then he spoke, and he was still a demon. And then Maharaj is saying, he spoke these words to me with great love and compassion, and I felt he was seeing straight into my polluted heart and acting to purify it. He instructed me that the goal was not to reside in Mathura, but to actually develop the consciousness of a devotee. So we see from Chaitanya Charitamrita what is the mood of a devotee. Especially we understand the topmost position of devotional services. Gopi, Padakamaleo, Das, Das, Anudasa. We always aspire to be the servant of the servant of the servant of the devotee. And quite often we hear that in the spiritual world, when a certain gopi is giving Krishna pleasure, or whatever, in whatever way Krishna is deriving pleasure, the other gopi or the other personality is always trying to further that pleasure. So there's always, in the spiritual, the way it's described is, in the material world there's a competition to be the first, but in the spiritual world there's a competition to be the last. Because the further down the chain you are, you're seeing that Krishna is getting so much pleasure from all these people and all these, everyone is serving Krishna so nicely, and the more this person sees that Krishna is deriving pleasure, the more ecstatic this person or this devotee becomes. So that's the mood that we really need to, at least, it may be difficult for us in our conditioning, because we are conditioned, especially in this material world, there's always a false ego steps in wherein we want to, outsmart the other person, especially in our professional lives. There's always competition, there's always things that come in the way that we feel that there should just be me and whoever is the topmost person. But in the spiritual world, we see there are more and more people between us and Krishna. That actually gives Krishna pleasure, and obviously that, as a byproduct, that also gives us pleasure. So becoming the servant of the servant of the servant is actually the most desired virtue, or actually quality that enables us to enter into the spiritual world and actually relish Krishna's pastimes. So, coming to the description of the demons or the demoniac qualities that's described in the Bhagavad Gita, especially when I was reading in verse number 5, when Krishna tells Arjuna, the transcendental qualities are conducive to liberation, whereas the demoniac qualities make for bondage. Do not worry, son of Pandu, for you are born with divine qualities. And in that, in the purport, Srila Prabhupada writes, and that's something just was like a light bulb moment for me, where Lord Krishna encouraged Arjuna by telling him that he was not born with demoniac qualities. His involvement in the fight was not demoniac, again what Prabhupada writes here, because he was considering the pros and cons. So Arjuna was trying to make an informed decision based on what, he's first trying to understand, even though he's been told by Krishna, Nimitta Matra Savasad, be my instrument and fight. Yet he's considering the pros and cons. He's understanding that so that's the difference between a devotee or a person who's endowed with divine qualities, is that there is the sense of accountability. That a person with divine qualities will always consider, or a godly person will always consider, that my acts have certain consequences, and how can I best try to, if it is going to cause pain or suffering to others, how can I mitigate that? So that here we see, so even in our day-to-day lives, in our whatever decisions we make, or in our dealings with others, rather than acting impulsively, we should, what Krishna is telling here, or as Prabhupada described in the purport, is that considering the pros and cons of every scenario, that will help us make informed decisions. And I think described it in the past, that any time when we have to make a certain decision, or we really are at crossroads of where to go, we always, there is the axiom there, sadhu, guru and shastra. We always take shelter of these three. And in terms of sadhus, this one principle that was told to me by some devotees by Hanuman Prashakumar, you always take guidance or advice from five brahmanas, and in that way you'll always get a balanced resolution. So now when we speak of demoniac qualities, ego is actually not the problem. It's a false ego, and it's a false ego that always comes in the way. Ego is healthy because it's actually we, as described in the Bhagavad Gita, chapter 15, Mamayavam tu jiva loke jiva bhuta sanata. We are always existing as part and parcel of Krishna. So we are actually meant to give Krishna pleasure. So that's our real ego. And we take pride in that. For us, we're the servants of Krishna. Obviously, we're the servants of Krishna. But false ego is when we identify ourselves with our body, with our identity, with our belongings, with whatever sense of attachment we have with this world. We always try to identify ourselves with that, and that is us. That's in one sense giving us anxiety, and it bounds us up in this network of illusion, as Krishna will later describe. So in verse number 21, this was quite interesting as I was reading through this. Actually, verse number 19, those who are envious and mischievous, who are the lowest amongst men, are perpetually cast into the ocean of material existence, into various demoniac species of life. So here we see that when the demons are actually just giving trouble to themselves, when they just fight among themselves, it's okay. It's not that big of an issue. But the moment they start approaching the domain of the Vaishnavas, then that's when, that's encroaching upon Krishna's personal property. And it's like just someone storming into my house, and then obviously then Krishna acts. And we see this too but though, for instance, in the Juhu pastime, my Guru Maharaj was once saying that he was giving a talk at, I believe, at the LA temple, and he was describing Mr. Nair, and he said, Prabhupada always said Mr. Nair was a demon, and in that assembly there was also His Grace Veerabahu Prabhu, a very senior disciple of Prabhupada, and he came up to Giriraj Swami later on. He said, actually, whenever I hear devotees say the word demon, I get a bit agitated. I don't like it. But what you've described of Mr. Nair is actually, he's quite fitting of the stature of a demon, because he acted in such a way. So he was saying that how Mr. Nair really took it as his personal mission to really, he cut the water supply for the devotees. He sent, there were so many things that he actually personally did to harm the devotees. And when by whatever arrangement he actually happened to die, or he leave his body, Srila Prabhupada was actually very pleased by it. He said, good, I was praying for it. And he said that personally I wasn't very keen on building a temple here, but when I brought Radha Ras Bihari to this property and I made a personal commitment to them that you please stay and I'll build you a temple, then it was my personal, commitment and promise to Radha Ras Bihari. And when this person, Mr. Nair, started obstructing it, then I just, felt that he was encroaching upon Krishna's property. So even though he was causing pain to the devotees, Krishna took it as, this personality is actually giving pain to me. So he actually considers this to be a personal insult. Even in the Bhagavatam, we see the pastime of Durvasa Muni. Yeah, such an exalted sage, he can actually enter into Vaikuntha. He can go to Vaikuntha, but then at the very moment, Lord Narayan tells him, actually, I am the property of my devotees. His Grace Viraj Krishna Prabhu this particular Sunday was describing it so beautifully that even though Krishna says, I'm independent, but then there's a contradiction right there in the Bhagavatam where he says, I'm actually dependent on the mercy of my devotees. So many other places we see in the Bhagavatam as well. Surprisingly, as I was hearing this, Gopi Puranadhana Prabhu was saying that Jagai and Madai, even though they did all kinds of offenses, they never actually encroached upon Vaishnavas until they attacked Nityananda Prabhu. But prior to that, they never actually attacked the Vaishnavas. The Vaishnavas also stayed away from them. So they kept a distance, but they never actually. So as long as demons are just fighting among themselves, just having their own little program, it's fine. Then the moment they come and encroach upon devotees, then that's Krishna's personal domain, and then that's where Krishna has to personally take charge and do things. I remembered I had read this book a long time ago, The Salted Bread. Anyone heard of that book? It's a story of two devotees. Actually, it's a whole yatra, but two devotees who in Armenia during the Iron Curtain. These two devotees in particularly were very instrumental in publishing and distributing Srila Prabhupada's books, and somehow or the other they got caught by the police on many occasions, or whoever it was, and then finally they were put in jail, and then they were put in somewhere in Siberia, in just subterranean temperatures, and they were given nothing to eat, and they were being constantly beaten. And one day, as it was described, this person who's actually describing the story, he's still alive and is, I believe, actively preaching in the Armenian Yatra. So he said that one day the police officer came to him, or whoever was actually overseeing, his confinement. He came up to him and he started beating him up more aggressively than he had ever previously beaten up. And so aggressively that this devotee who would never scream or say anything, he just started screaming like anything. And this police officer said, the reason why I'm doing so is because every night or every evening after I go, and my wife tells me, did you beat those Hare Krishna? And I tell her yes, she gets so jubilant, she gets so happy. So today, I just felt like, I need to make her more happy. So he started, and then the next day, this devotee was obviously so bruised and tattered that he didn't even know the next day it was morning or night. So it was eventually, I think after 2 days he finally came to his senses, and he looked around, there was no one there. And then 3 days later he saw some other guard bringing him food or whatever that they were being given. And then on the third day he asked, look at how kind and merciful this devotee is. He's asking the guard, what happened to the other police officer who was coming? And this guard was a bit shocked to see, to see this devotee or this person was actually asking about where's that other guard, because he had known what had happened. And he looked around and he said, actually, just 2 days ago, this police officer had such a bad car crash that actually he said that he was with his family, and it was such a bad accident that all of the bodily limbs of this entire family were just scattered all over the place. No one could even understand. They could only trace it by locating the face of this one family member, and then able to trace out, oh, okay, this all belongs to this one family. So yeah, the moment, like I said, there are so many instances like these. So even in our dealings with devotees, as we described earlier, there are certain qualities. It may happen that certain qualities may be eclipsed, by how we deal with others. So it's actually of utmost importance for us to be vigilant and careful. I was hearing the pastime of Jagai and Madai, and in that it is said that as soon as Lord Chaitanya, gave them the mercy of, he blessed them, and at that very moment, all of the sins of Jagai and Madai, Lord Chaitanya took all of the sinful reactions, and his body, his golden body actually became blackish for that short period of time. And then after that, I can't remember the sequence of things, but where it ends up being is where Lord Chaitanya tells that I'll cast away these sinful reactions into the hearts of those who are envious against devotees. So, as we just read in this text here, 16:19, those who are envious and mischievous, who are lowest amongst men, are perpetually cast into the ocean of material existence, into various demoniac species of life. So, for these people, there's no hope except for the Lord Himself coming and delivering them. So we see in the pastime of Shishupal, Hiranyakashipu, Hiranyaksha, they committed all these atrocities, but in the end, the Lord Himself comes to deliver them. Now, I would like to end on this pastime of what Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, is that these persons actually take shelter of the insatiable lust. So, as devotees, we take shelter of the dust of Shri Radha Gopinath and devotees, and obviously demons take shelter of the insatiable lust. So lust needs to transform into dust. So I was reading this pastime by Chaitanya Charan Prabhu on Ravana, and from the Ramayana, how Ravana actually is the personification of lust. Because he carried out, how he behaved, what he did against Sita. So how do we overcome this lust? And how lust to get transformed into dust is basically the acronym DUST. He broke it down into 4 words. So D stands for determination, that anytime, for example, if we're infected by some disease or we have some difficulty, we should be determined to fight, for us to overcome that. So the Bhagavad Gita, I think verse 241, Eke Kurunandana, Vyasmika Buddhi, Eke Hu Kurunandana. So we should have the single-pointed attention, determination to be able to give everything for us to overcome that weakness or whatever it may be. So that's D in that acronym of DUST. U stands for understanding. The understanding comes from scriptures, from texts like Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam, where we understand if we overcome with lust, how in Shastra it's described how this material world actually overpromises and underdelivers. We see that all the desires that we are trying to pursue, they actually, even once we are able to get it, the thrill and the pleasure that we are actually seeking is very short-lived. So that understanding comes through Shastra. So we take shelter of Shastra, and that Shastra becomes our astra for us to overcome our lust. In that dust, then S stands for submission. We should always be submissive to our authorities, to our peers, to our well-wishers, because until we have the submissive attitude, it becomes very hard for those instructions to really penetrate into our heart. Tad vidhi pranipatena pariprashnena sevaya upadakshanti te jnanam jnanam tattvadarshinaha. That just try to approach the truth by learning from it. Just try to learn the truth by approaching a spiritual master, because they're seeds of truth. So for us to really, we need to submit ourselves to the Vaishnavas and understand what is it and how is it that I'll be able to serve them better, or how can I at least perform devotional service and carry out my prescribed duties in bhakti. And T stands for training. So it's not that we just we are determined, we understand, and we are submissive, but we actually need to act. So As His Great Vaisheshika Prabhu says, commitment entails devotion. So when we're committed, that actually translates into devotional service. And obviously we follow the 9 processes of Bhakti, Shravanam, Kirtanam, Vishnu Smaranam, and that helps us overcome. Eventually that lust actually gets transformed into dust, where we are seeking the dust of the devotees, we're seeking the dust of the Lord. So I shall end here. If anyone has any questions or comments. Yes, Prabhu. Hare Krishna. Yes. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Will be Prahlad Maharaj. Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. 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 I mean, we see in the pastime of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu too that he was in the womb for 13 months. Just 500 years ago. So, in medical science, obviously, this is a different age that we're speaking of, Satya Yuga. So, people could live for 10,000 years, people could practice and meditate and, do things that would be of much longer duration than us. So, that's the medical point of view. I can't remember, but I think there's one species that actually tends to also bear, the child or their offspring for a relatively large period of time. Now, in terms of why did she wait, she was reluctant to give birth to a baby. She waited for 100 years. So that what Prabhupada concludes that she could at least save the demigods from the disturbance for that period. So that's how I would read it as, that she understands what's about to happen and she's just trying to save them from the disturbance for that particular period. That means that she's, I would say, maybe trying to mitigate it. That's my speculation, but that's what the statement reads. She's just saving them. It's not that she said, I won't give birth. She just says she was reluctant to give birth, so she waited for 100 years. I was trying to read this in the following chapters, and in one chapter when it just describes, there's no purport to it, but where she says after 100 years of pregnancy, she brought forth the children. There's no purport to it. So what happened, what made her change, to give birth after 100 years, there's no purport to that. So anything else? Yes. Mm-hmm. Mm. Mm-hmm. 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 I believe a key ingredient in all of this is actually submissiveness. That's how I would understand it. I'm trying to recall a conversation that I was hearing, either Srila Prabhupada doing to his disciples or it was some other devotees, but a key element is actually submissiveness. For example, if it's not that a devotee, from what I understood, devotee just, is saying, oh, I'll wait till these divine qualities are awakened in me, so that for me, because until then I'm just holding on, because of my conditioning, I can't. For example, if someone says, the injunction is only by chanting once, you can actually destroy sinful reactions. You can destroy all your sinful reactions at once, even those that have not been committed yet. But that's when you chant purely. So until we come to the stage of pure chanting, it's namabhas, you're still in that clearing stage. So from what I understand, even being in the anartha nivritti stage, basically, you go from shraddha, then sadhu sangha, and then there's anartha nivritti, where there's clearing of all of this. In my just hearing from devotees and just little that I've learned, that being honest to myself and just being submissive helps, and associating with those that have those qualities definitely helps, just somehow or the other, being able to appreciate, these are the qualities I should aspire for, and I believe the holy name really helps, and ask kind of thing. That helps. Is there anything else you'd like to share? Yes. Yep. Okay, nothing else. We'll end here. Grantha Srimad Bhagavatam ki, Srila Prabhupada ki, Vita Gopremanandi, Srila Prabhupada ki, Jai.